My name's Baldwin Vanderbilt. I'm here today to interview Sherman Washburn, and we're having Caitlin McCartan with us. Sherm, to start things out, maybe, I know that you moved here in the 40s, but maybe you could start out very quickly just saying when you were born, where you were born, and your schooling, and then we can move on to your time here in Oregon.
Well, I was born in Redlands, California, November 5th, 1917. And I first came to Oregon in 1941 when I won an audition at the NBC and ABC stations in Portland. That would be KGW and KEX, both owned by the Oregonian. And I came here in came to Portland in July of 41, and then left in March 23rd of 42 when the Army caught up with me too. And I was gone for over 4 years in the Army, and then came back to Portland and was able to go to work back at KEX. The GI Bill got me my job back because they had to, I guess. Anyway, but FDR had disliked having multiple ownership of radio stations in a given town. So he made the Oregonian, which owned both KGW and KEX, sell one, and they sold KEX to Westinghouse. And Westinghouse owned KDKA in Pittsburgh, I believe it is. And I think they were using this as a tax write-off because they built new studios, air-conditioned studios. They bought the former Jewish schoolhouse with 2 floors. We had studios upstairs and a big studio downstairs. And studio orchestra that I thought was a nice luxury. And I stayed there until, well, when I came, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Just before I left to go into the Army, I had a farewell visit from a man who'd driven an ambulance in World War I. And he said, Sherm, when you come back, you're going to find your values are changed. And it didn't occur to me what that meant then. And when I came back, my values were changed. And one thing that changed them is when we landed in Italy, and that was in January of 1945. I got overseas late. They disembarked us from our ship. We were on the Santa Paula cruise liner that had been made into a troop carrier. And we got off on the gangplank onto the hull of an overturned hospital ship that had been scuttled. And we walked along the hull of the hospital ship to near the dock, and then they put a gangplank from that point of the L down to the hull down to the dock, and we were on land. And we were going inland in GI trucks, 6x6s, and towing a trailer behind each one. And the truck that was ahead of our trailer stopped suddenly, and our trailer ran into the trailer. Our truck ran into their trailer, and it smashed the radiator. So we were just stranded there, and the others took off and went on to our destination. And in a short while, there appeared alongside the truck 2 little Italian kids. I would have guessed the kid was the boy was about 12, and I would have guessed the little girl 3 or 4. But I discovered children were not of comparable sizes because they'd been at war in Italy since about 1935 when they started the war with Ethiopia. And but anyway, the boy swore up and down that he was 15, and he flipped a cigarette off the truck and immediately picked it up and started to smoke it. And he said, hey, you're not old enough to be smoking cigarettes. And he said, I'm 15. But anyway, accompanying him was his sister, and I thought she was 4 or 5 at the most. But what bugged me the most, and was the first thing that made me change my values, was that little girl was standing barefoot in the snow begging for food. And she was carrying a net sack like we carry onions in, something like that. And the little boy was carrying a lard pail in case we had some soup. Well, of course, we didn't have any rations at all on the truck. We were just a stranded truck. But never forget the sight of that little girl barefoot in the snow begging for food, and that started to change my values. So I decided when I saw what a mess Italy was, propaganda on the walls quoting Mussolini all the time and one thing another like that, their country a complete wreck, and children begging for food in the snow, I thought the children of war are never reported. And so I changed my values and decided that when I got back to Portland, I'd go into news. So I went into news at KEX. The news department was run by Bob Thomas, and he had a fellow working with him whose name was Tom McCall. And my initial instruction in news was from those two men, which was very good instruction. And I worked in news and special events, and then as a board announcer until I went into television in 1955, March of 55. Channel 12 was going on the air, and KPTV was ultra-high frequency channel 27. So there was no network for us, and we were all live production. We didn't have teleprompters or things like that, which was an experience because well, I could remember things better in those days than I do now, I tell you that. And we had one girl that could memorize practically a page of copy in a short while. She'd go in their corner. You'd see people over in their corner talking out loud to themselves and looking at their script. They were memorizing what they had to know on air. But anyway, I'd learned to run a camera, and I was the entire news department. I left KEX to be in the news department, and Charlie LaFranchise left KPOJ to be the sports department. And that's one of the fun things, is not only the people you meet when you're in news like that, but you meet some amazing staff people, and Charlie LaFranchise is one of those wonderful guys I ever worked with. And Charlie had a weakness, even as you and I, he couldn't remember people's names. So he'd solved his problem by having a nickname for everybody. Man or woman, he called you Curly. Curly, could you tap this up for me? Curly, how about a game of golf Saturday afternoon? I mean, either way, his name was Curly. Well, the girls at the office at KPOJ decided to have a farewell party for Charlie. One of the girls was very artistic, and she did a big fancy card, farewell card, and she made sure everybody signed that card. Then the day of the party, management broke down and bought a farewell party, a cup of coffee and a dozen donuts, and they came to the end of the party, and they gave Charlie his card, and he opened it up and discovered that everybody that had signed the card had signed their name as Curly. I say it's wonderful, the people you meet and work with. What's your next question?
Okay. Well, you lived on River Road for many, many, many years, and that right across was a church campground for that. Do you remember kind of what it was like? Did they have special events there? Or?
Oh, yes. Well, isn't it there now?
It's still there. It's changing. They've knocked down several of those little houses there.
Well, when we came out, it was I think it was known as the Evangelical Campground, something like that. And they had an enormous PA system. It would just boomed all around the area there, and of course it woke us up too. And we'd hear, "Oh, good morning, Jesus is wonderful," and "wake up," and all that stuff. And we kind of resented that invasion of our sleep. But they would have big events there, you're right. And I never attended any of them, but it was quite an active place in the summertime.
Okay. And also near where you lived as a Buchanan's Grocery.
Well, that was an institution itself. It was run by Inez Buchanan, and Inez knew everybody in town and everybody's kids, and she was a saint. She really was, and she wasn't very big, but she had enough energy to run that store by herself. And she had a son who had been crippled in some way, and he ran a print shop in the basement. And I know our water bills are all printed by him. And Inez lived a long time. I've forgotten when she died, but she was a marvelous person, and the place hadn't been the same without her.
And when people went there, was it the kind of system where you could just say put it on the bill,
Yes.
and then once a month or so
Yeah.
the bill would come and you'd...
She'd carried credit customers that way.
I wonder how many of the kids would go in there and get something and say, put it on the family bill.
I really don't know. I don't know.
The building almost looks like it might have been a fire station at one time.
Yeah, we thought that too, but I don't think it was.
Okay.
We thought so too. It looked like a fire station.
Yeah.
But she rented the upstairs apartments, and I think it's been bought again, and they redid the windows and something like that.
Yeah.
And but the store has not run continuously since then. It's been different things.
And did she live in that building?
Oh yeah, she did.
Okay. And I know a friend of mine said that in the basement was this big piece of equipment, and he didn't know what it was. But now that you say there was a print shop there,
Yeah.
it probably was the...
Well, I was never in the basement. I never saw it either.
Yeah. Well, where did people shop for food when you were there in the 50s? And
Well, a lot of us grew some of our food.
Mhm.
I enjoyed the gardening there, and we had a neighbor. Now the neighborhood has really changed. We had a neighbor who had hogs, cows, turkeys, and all that's gone now. Nobody has cows anymore, or turkeys, or chickens, or anything. It's become suburban residents since then. I don't know if the population has changed any or not. They've filled in some vacant lots. It must have changed some. It was slow changing, I would say.
so Buchanan's wasn't really a full, from what I understood, a full featured store or grocery store. But if you wanted like
Soap, eggs, ham, you go by and pick it up from Inez.
okay, so she would have that. And you mentioned the chickens and the cows. Were there still active farms? I mean, larger than just somebody who...
Oh yeah, there's a dairy farm that is now where that, next to the post office. The post office was built on the part of a dairy farm, I'm sure. And that whole corner from the post office up to 99E was a dairy farm at one time. And there used to be a theater across the street, a drive-in theater.
Right, yeah. That's the street that I live on.
Oh, that's the street. Well, you should know that better than I do then.
Yeah, that was the Neff Dairy, but I thought they had quit before then. But
Well, maybe it had just quit, but I always viewed it as a dairy in my memory.
there's a barn on River Road near where the Homewoods Retirement Center is, which used to be there used to be a very big house there that a judge lived in. But do you remember that barn, or if there was, it was a dairy barn?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No, I don't remember that.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about the trolley, since that...
the trolley
pretty
was
famous.
great. I thought the trolley was great, and it's too bad they didn't use the right-of-way it had already employed when they're reenacting it now, instead of buying new land and whatever else they're doing, running it down the streets when they had an off-street runway. But those cars I had ridden when I was in Riverside, and I lived 4 miles from the high school, and I could run up to Arlington Avenue and grab one of these trolleys just like you saw here, and go to high school. I think it cost 15 cents. And for another 15 cents, I could ride it home, or else walk home. I was very active in those days, and I'd walk home carrying a trombone in one hand and a briefcase of books on the other, and do it in an hour, 4 miles an hour. But couldn't do that now.
Yeah. So did you take the trolley or
Here,
for commuting to work, or?
my kids did.
Uh-huh.
They'd commute to Oak Grove to the soda fountain and get a milkshake and then take it back. But I never took it into town, no.
Okay.
Because I'd go to work at, I had to be at the studio when I was working the morning news. I had to be at the studio at 5, so I'd drive in 10 minutes from Jennings Lodge. There's no traffic on the road.
Yeah. And did your kids then go to the Jennings Lodge school?
All my kids went to Jennings Lodge in Oregon City School District.
Yeah.
I served in the Oregon City School District for 4 years as a member of the board, and then chairman my last year. I don't remember what those years were, but I've had a great interest in the place. And I went to your community college starting after I'd retired in September of '39. I came back from Europe, went over with my wife and her two sisters and their husbands and our daughter Jenny, and I felt so stupid to be over in Europe, and they'd start talking about Byzantine art and stuff, and I didn't know from nothing. And I didn't speak German, although we were visiting all her relatives who were German. And some of them didn't speak English, so I vowed that I would take German when I got back in the States. And when I think we got back on a Friday night, and Clackamas Community College opened the following Monday, and I went out there and I signed up for German 1, art history, one of the most fascinating courses I ever took. If I'd known art history existed, I think I'd tried to learn to teach it. It was so fascinating. And then I took basic design, and well, I was taking 12 credits. I've forgotten what the other subject was. But after the first year of that, I thought, heck, I'm supposed to be retired. That's too much. So I laid off. I took 12 units, I think, that first year, and then I'd cut back to 1 course a year after that.
Mm-hmm. Well, what if we just take a little break right now, and if that's good. Now, the other thing about the trolley trail is that was also a freight line.
True.
And so and some of the houses, even the old houses, were close to the tracks. And I always kind of wondered if, when the trains went through, how often did they go? Did they blow their horns?
Generally every night. As for horn blowing, I suppose they did when they crossed 99E. That was an amazing intersection. It had Jennings Avenue, 99E, and then the tracks cut through at an angle like that. And there was a street that ran in the same direction that the tracks did too, so it was really a weird intersection.
Yeah. And the other mode of transportation was the superhighway. And you'd already mentioned the drive-in theater that was on there. When you moved here in the 50s, was it like half still farmland or in agricultural use, or were there very many stores or motels? What did it kind of look like?
Well, there were these vacant spaces where people had acreage that they hadn't done anything with. That's true, but people would have their own chickens. We never had any livestock, but our neighbors did, and we mainly gardened. We didn't try other people. I'm sorry to not give you a more direct answer to that, but it's kind of a general question. I find difficulty filling in the answers.
Well, where was the biggest, I heard there was a Piggly Wiggly store down in this neighborhood, which turned into a Keno's later on.
Well, I remember Keno's.
Okay.
Yeah, Keno's was a wonderful store.
So is that one of the stores that you would go to?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that was in Oak Grove, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, Keno's was a wonderful store.
Yeah.
As far as like clothes and stuff like that, would like the mother do a lot of that, or would you purchase your own clothes, like already
clothes?
made, or would you make your own clothes? Or?
Oh no, we weren't that pioneer type. But I did have a spinning wheel. That's a separate story. Funny story. You want it?
Yeah.
Well, I was working at Channel 6, and the technicians are, to me, amazing people. They can do all kinds of things and figure out all things. And they taught me how to use a Soroban, you know, the little Japanese computer, kind of with beads you flip up and down.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, then I went to work one day, and it says, "Hey, Sherm, we know where you can get a spinning wheel kit." And I thought, a spinning wheel kit? And I remembered when I was in Scotia, I'd visited, been a guest of a lady there that had a house with a spinning wheel in it. I thought, gee, that's great. Sometime I'd like to own a white house with green shutters like this one has, and a spinning wheel. I thought that'd be great. So here was a chance to get a kit, and I thought, oh, I'll surprise Evelyn. I was interested in learning all the pioneer crafts I could. I had my own blacksmith anvil and forge and things like that, and I assumed Evelyn would naturally want to learn how to spin. So I sent for this kit, which I'd never done before, and it was from New Zealand, and it came in a box about this square and about that thick, and I had it sent to the studios so I could surprise Evelyn with it when I went home. And I came through the back door with this big box. And Evelyn says, "What's that?" I said, "It's a spinning wheel." "Well, who's it for?" And I said, "It's for you. Don't you want to learn how to spin?" "No." My daughter was standing there and said, "Jenny, wouldn't you like to learn how to spin?" "No." So I was stuck with a spinning wheel kit and nobody to use it. So I put it up in my room for a while and didn't want to contaminate the rest of the house. And the neighbor young lady came by one day and she says, "Sherm, I hear you got a spinning wheel kit upstairs." Now I have a husband that heads up Manual's art at the high school. And if you'll give me that kit, I'll have him put it together for you. And let me use it for a while. I'll have the use of the spinning wheel, and you'll have it put together. And I thought, gee, what great piece of work, because I'm no carpenter. I'd be lousy at putting it together anyway. So I let her have it for a while. Then she finished and brought it back. And as soon as I retired, I thought, well, by golly, I'll learn how to spin. I would like to spin enough wool to make myself a pair of wool socks. So that was my goal, to learn to spin. And they had this pioneer craft school out at Damascus. And I went out there, and I was the only man taking spinning, but it was very interesting because those are some of the smartest, most intelligent women I ever ran into that ran that school. And they taught me how to spin, how to weave, and you can't be a dummy and weave. Set up a loom that requires good intelligence, I'll guarantee you. But I was a lousy spinner. My yarn was all lumpy. But those women could spin, you know, and carry on a conversation, not even look at the line they were spinning out. And anyway, I wound up making hooked rugs, which isn't exacting as to the size of yarn you're using. And that's how I came to learn to spin and to weave. I learned how to make felt out there. And it was a part of, I found wool was very interesting. I didn't know that wool, the fibers of wool, have little tiny hooks on them. And that's why they'll catch on to each other and hook together. And that's why wool is probably the easiest thing to spin with that there is. because it goes together so beautifully. As far as knitting my socks, I started to learn to knit. I thought I'd just learn a square, just practice, and I couldn't keep the darn yarn on the needles. So somebody says, well, I couldn't get them off the needle. That was my problem. And then they said, well, get a plastic set of needles and you'll be able to handle it all right. Well, then I couldn't keep it on the needle, so I gave up knitting and went into looming then. Part of my pioneer craft education.
Mm-hmm. So, kind of related to that, on Sundays, were the stores mostly closed, and what kind of activities would people do on Sundays? Would that be like a day of fishing or boating or?
All of the above for those that had the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
I was not interested in fishing or hunting, but we had a wonderful area to garden in, and I was interested in that. Mm-hmm. And I had a big lawn to keep up, and I enjoyed the outdoors. But other people fished and did other things. Then one week in the month I was in the National Guard, in the Air Guard for about 5 or 6 years, and then I went back to the Army Reserve. And you'll blow a weekend no matter what you belong to when you belong to those. Mm-hmm. But your time was taken up. I never lied around being bored. Of course, I had a wife that was very active, about your size, and she was a go-go gal all the time. She was a nurse and had been at Pearl Harbor for 2.5 years during World War II. So she had more rank than I had. When she got out of the Navy, she was a lieutenant, full grade, and I was just a first lieutenant when I got out, and then I got promoted to captain on leaving the service. But it was an interesting time for both of us. She was in Hawaii, and I was in Italy, and you look on a globe and you find you've got just about the whole world between you. And we kept in touch by airmail. And I wrote her, do you want these narratives and things like this?
Yeah.
Well, I wrote her that I'd like a cigarette lighter, and they didn't have them in the PX that we had over there. And she says, I'll send you one. So I forgot about that. And one day in the mail, there came this small package, so big like that. I said, I bet that's my lighter. And I hastily, sitting in my tent, other tent buddies sitting around, all opened our mail up and opened this package up. There's a can of tooth powder. Now, what the heck's that? Why she sent me a can of tooth powder? And one of my tent mates said, he said, open that can up, I bet you'll find your lighters inside it. And it was. And he says, that girl's a lot smarter than you are. You ought to marry her. So I did.
On holidays like July 4th or so, was there big community activities, or did people kind of do their own individual things?
You never knew my wife. She really celebrated all the holidays. We'd have a big gang over for the 4th of July, and we'd have activities in the front yard. We could set up a big volleyball net, and then have dinner. And then, much to my alarm, they would shoot off fireworks afterwards. And I said, I don't want anything that goes above 12 feet. But they observed it pretty well. But I was a cautious old man on that one. At an early age, I didn't want rockets setting stuff on fire. Mm-hmm. But we had a lot of fun, mm-hmm. all the holidays. And
there was... I understood, and it may have been gone already, there was a dance hall on Cedar Island.
Okay, that's across the river.
Yeah.
It wasn't there when we were here.
Okay, it was already gone.
The Beelers are friends of ours that lived opposite that island, and it was long gone then, but okay. I understand people come out from Portland on the trolley car and go over there to dance.
Yeah.
There's a noisy button here.
Well, tell us some more about when you were with radio and later TV. Did you write a lot of your own scripts, or did somebody else prepare those and give them to you? And I know Catlin's got some questions on this.
Okay.
Too.
Well, when I came to Portland, to KGW, KEX, the combined studios, we had our own news department. Our studios were on the 7th floor. Then the business offices and news department were on the 8th floor. And the news was all written for us. You come downstairs and on half sheets of paper, all written out for us. It was wonderful. You didn't have to do a thing. You just know what you're. I had to learn Northwest names. I came up here never having seen the word Multnomah and all these Indian names you have up here, and I didn't know what first thing about them, and I'd get some irate phone calls from listeners. What's the matter with you? Don't you know how to pronounce them? No, I don't.
Now, like I saw a story where you crawled down into the sewers, and found some tunnel or.
Well, that was when I was in television. I was at Channel 6, and I wanted to make a documentary film. Well, the man that instigated that film was a commissioner of the city of Portland, and he was a fascinating person, Bill Bowes. And he'd been a labor man before, and he was not a shrinking violet. And I was talking to him one day, and he said, "You reporters," he said, "you go on about all this stuff, about what's happening in the sewers and all these lines." He says, "I've yet to get one of you to go down inside and see what it's like inside a sewer." And I thought, well, that's a challenge. So I said, well, yeah, I'll go down and make a film about it, because the original sewers on the east side, now I'm talking about over by Brooklyn Yards, were all made out of brick. The walls were. And it was about the size of a subway. It was pretty good size, maybe 12, 15, the ceiling maybe 12 feet high. I'm just guesstimating that. And so I went over and met these people that do that work. They're very brave people, and I admire them a great deal. It isn't like the comedian on television who supposedly worked in the sewers. But anyway, they gave me white coveralls I was to wear. They gave me a white hard hat I was to wear. And when I was to go down in the sewer, I'd have to have light down there. So they took some 2x4s and other planks down, and they built a little platform down in the sewer that I could put my tripod on and keep my camera nice and clear. They said if you drop anything, forget it. If you drop a glove, forget it. We'll get another one from up above. If it goes in the sewer, it's gone. But, so with my hip boots on and all, I went down there. And I had 2 floodlights mounted on a board, and we ran a line upstairs to up above to a generator they had. And the lights came on, and it was wonderful. And so I got pictures of it. When they would start their patrol to see what condition the sewers were in, they had a children's little metal cart, little wagon. They had a bucket of freshly prepared concrete in there and 5 or 6 bricks and a trowel. And they'd throw that with them. If they find a brick was loose and coming out, they'd pull it out and put a new one in and put some concrete on it, and away you go. Well, the lines, those early days, all the sewer lines ended in the Willamette River. And so we were over on the east side, and we went down this line, and the cave. Top of the line was caving in like this. It was U-shaped to top. They were trying to promote to get the sewers repaired and changed too. And they were so old that, I mean, it had come down like that. And so I photographed that, and we went down 2 or 3 different places where you go down the manhole and all. And I was very careful not to drop anything, and survived. And I admire these guys that do that work every day. One funny thing, we went down one sewer line was over the east side, and there's a lot of steam down there. And I said, what causes that? And they said, we don't know. It's this way every Monday. And I went home and told my wife that. She said, well, I know what it is. All the housewives are doing their laundry on Monday because they're cleaning up from the weekend. She says, it's a perfectly normal explanation.
Well, as far as what was reported and so forth, was it, I mean, it seems these days that newscasts have become very polarized with one group over here and one group over there. What was that like in those days as far as what topics you were being asked to report?
Bob Thomas had worked in newspapers for a long time before he came to write news for radio. And he insisted that we get both sides, if possible, on a story, give name credit on a story. If you couldn't get the name, you wouldn't put it on. Because I think Associated Press has that as a rule. You have to give the name of your source of who said what. And one thing I steered clear of was religion, because you can't get people more irate than if they think you're reporting something wrong about their religion. So I steered clear of reporting religion, just from experience. I didn't want to get a ruckus going.
So you had a choice of, if something came in and you didn't want to report it, you had a choice then of not reporting it? Or?
Not in that sense. I mean, I probably remembered a sergeant I had in the Army. He was a colored sergeant. And he said that his pappy done told him that you never mention religion or women. Those are the 3 things you steer clear of, and you'll stay clear of trouble.
Politics?
Yeah, probably politics, yeah. But the assignments news assignments were given by Bob Thomas or Tom McCall. And if they weren't there, then I'd choose the stories myself. But I didn't have much opportunity. I would, as I say, I'd drive in. I'd get up at 4 and exercise and eat my breakfast and get dressed and drive to the studio and be there by 5. And at KEX at that time, we had 4 teletypes that had been running all night. And I'd tear up the news that had come in on all 4 teletypes. And Barney Keep had come in at 6. And he signed the station on. And when I was telling you, tearing up the teletypes, I'd break out the stories in international, national, local, agriculture, because we had a farm program going on the air, and feature and humor. If there's any humor stories, well, I'd save them for Barney Keep. And by the time you've torn up 4 of those stories, and then I'd get ready to do the news at 7. We'd taken a trip to California, and I wanted to know what the weather was that we'd be experiencing as we went on down the highway. Someone didn't even give a weather report. And so I thought, well, I'll lead my news off at 7 with the weather. And I'd call the Weather Bureau, and that's where I met Bob Lynott and Mary, is it Livingston? I can't remember. I met all the people that later went into television, weather. I would be quoting them at 7 in the morning because I'd always lead off with that story because people were getting ready to go to work at 7. They'd have a faint idea of what to wear and so forth. And then I'd go on and read the news. Then I'd be free from 7:15 until 12:15. Paul Harvey would come on from 12 to 12:15. Then local news would be 12:15 to 12:30, and I'd come on with my local news. Well, I'd always heard the expression of legwork for news reporters, and so I would take off from the studio at 7:15 or wherever and walk any place I could go and see what I could find for stories. And I could always find something. Of course, City Hall was one of my favorites because that was only a few blocks from KEX at 13th and Main. And I remember one day I was walking through the park block as I was going over there, and I saw all these pigeons around. And I wondered, suppose a bum was hungry and he captured one of those pigeons. Could he be arrested for stealing that pigeon? So I went down to City Hall. I knew the city attorney, and I asked him that question. I said, could he be arrested for that? He says, why, of course not. Those pigeons are the children of God. They belong to everybody.
Were there a lot of homeless people back then as compared to today? Or about the same?
I don't know if it's a comparison thing or not. There's always...
Always, okay. And a question I had kind of on how the media dealt with war, compared to how it's dealt with today. How, in your experience?
Well, when World War II broke out, I was on duty. Being the bottom of the seniority list at the announcers of KGW, KEX, naturally I would get the early Sunday morning assignment. So the day war broke out, I had done the 8 o'clock break. And then we were carrying a drama program. I think it was Chekhov's A Cherry Orchard or something like that. And so I just settled back for an hour to listen to the radio, the program, and all of a sudden the news was wiped out, and this network announcer came on screaming, "The Japanese are bombing Pearl Harbor." And I thought, oh boy. Now, my mother had told me years before that, in time of emergency, remain calm. And that instruction came to me. And I had a reason to be uncalm because my brother was on the USS California, and I knew he was at Pearl Harbor because I'd gotten a letter from him just a week before. So I thought, remain calm. Then because of my previous radio experience at KIEM in Eureka, I knew that we would immediately be hit with phone calls. So I called the Oregonian operator downstairs and told her that we're going to be flooded with calls. The war has broken out with the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor, and I will help you answer the phone. I said, you won't be able to handle it by yourself there. So I have nothing to do for the next hour, so put calls up to me and I will be able to answer the phones for you. And that's what happened. And the network announcers were screaming every time they would get on the air. And Ralph Rogers, our program director, called the studio and said, I want Sherman Washburn to do all newscasts that we do today. He's one guy that you can understand because he isn't screaming. So I wound up working until 10 o'clock that night. I heard the governor of Oregon give away the battleship Oregon. Do you remember the battleship Oregon? That was a battleship that was famous in the Spanish-American War. It had been built in San Francisco. And we didn't have the Panama Canal then, so it went clear around South America and up to Cuba in time to join in the Battle of, I forgotten, Santiago Bay or something like that, and it made history. And we tied it up here after the war. It was just south of the Hawthorne Bridge. And so the governor, Sprague, wanted to help out, so he had telegraphed FDR, "I'll give you the battleship Oregon to help out." Well, I don't know. FDR was good enough not to say, "I don't think that's up to date enough," but anyway. The irony of it is that it was eventually sold for scrap that a Japanese bought after the war was over. All that remains is the mast and the emblem that was on the bow. And one time the two funnels of the old Oregon were in, I don't know if they're still around or not. Irony of it, it was given to fight the war, and the Japanese got it in the end anyway.
Did you do interviews with people?
Yes, I did. To do good interviews, you have to do at least one a week. Do one a day, it's better.
What were some of the most notable or interesting interviews that you did?
Well, I think the best interview I ever did, unfortunately, we didn't have recording facilities then. I'd love to have a recording of it now. We had the Dewey-Stassen debate in 1948. Tom Dewey and Stassen were both running to be president, and they were both stumping the state, because in those days the Oregon primary amounted to something like they do now back in New England. And so they decided they would have a debate. Well, where to have it? Well, we had the biggest studio in town. And I called the Republican Wheels down at the Multnomah Hotel and pointed out to them we had the best facilities and that they should hold it there. And the problem was when to hold it. CBS wanted it to be held at one time. NBC wanted it another. Mutual wanted it another time. And I said to this official, I said, "Look, you pick the time, and they will pick it up because they don't want to not have it. So you pick the time you want it to be on," and that's what he did. He says, "Why didn't I think of that?" He says, "What do you want out of this?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to be ambassador to Mexico." You know, I was never ambassador to Mexico. But anyway, after I was announcer for the debate, and Stassen arrived at the studio first. He came in very calmly by himself and complimented the operator about her dress, how nice she looked. And he came in the studio and sat down. Now, we had big tables. There was a dais in the center for the man who was to introduce them. He's the wheel of the Republican Party. And there's a big table here. And then on the other side, there's another big table. And then there were 3 newsreels there, and we put them in the glassed off area for the audience. And the audience was all wire service and newspapers from all over the United States. We put on chairs in the Studio A in front of where this was. And these two tables were like this, lined up, and they lined their lights up on it so they could get them from the newsreel standpoint. Well, Dewey arrived, very big frown on his head, comes storming in, and he greets Stassen, and then he went over to his table and sat down over here. And Dewey says, "Anybody from broadcast here?" And I looked around, and I was the only person from broadcast in the studio. And I said, "Well, I'm from broadcast. Can I help you, Governor?" And he said, "Yes." He says, "I want my table moved. It's too close to theirs, and I don't want them to hear what I was saying during the debate." I said, well, Governor, the newsreels got you all zeroed in where the table is now. If you do that, you'll change their lighting and everything for the newsreels. I don't care, move it. So I went out and found the engineers, and they moved it maybe 2 feet, 3 feet, I don't know. But anyway, Dewey was there, and we knew it. Well, after the debate was over, that was one time in my life I was on ABC, CBS, and Mutual, all at the same time.
Now, what's Mutual?
Mutual Broadcasting System. It's another radio network. And I wasn't on NBC because Bob Tomlinson wanted to do the announcing, but it was being held in our studio. So they contrived that they had battery-powered equipment, and in the event of a light failure, they were the only ones that would be able to have the broadcast. And they wedged their way into NBC, was over in the corner there. Well, anyway, the broadcast ended, and I had to go upstairs to our other studios up there because Stassen was doing a state network broadcast. Yes, it was just the state of Oregon. And I was to sign him on and off the air. You have to give a disclaimer. The broadcast you are about to hear is a paid political broadcast. It does not express the views of this station or management. So I went up to sign him on, and they were having a practice session. Dewey and his interviewer, who was a young senator from Wisconsin named McCarthy. I don't know how long he'd been in office. And he bounced around, over to me. Who won the debate? We won. We won the debate, didn't we? We won. And anyway, he and Stassen were running over the questions they'd asked him, but he wouldn't. McCarthy wouldn't mention Dewey's name. He always referred to him as the little son of a bitch. So, if the little son of a bitch says this, what are you going to say? I've never forgotten that. Of course, it wasn't on the air, but that was McCarthy, and long before he became as well known as he did later. And he came by to be interviewed one Sunday morning, and I went down to interview him, and it was one of the best interviews I ever did, getting back to your original question. One of the best questions. He was good to interview.
McCarthy.
McCarthy was. Yeah, this is a separate interview, but it was years later, and I still think that was the best interview I ever did. And of course, I have no recording of it because we didn't record things in those days.
And when you interviewed him that separate time, was that when he was really getting in deep with the whole?
Oh yes, he was really raising Cain about the communists and how the State Department was full of commies and all that.
Yeah.
Rigmarole. Sorry to babble on there.
No, fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
But any more questions?
Well, what about, I know that I think both Kennedys, John Kennedy and Bob Kennedy, came through Portland and spent some time here.
I never met either one of them.
Okay.
I was in the booth when Bob Kennedy came to Channel 12. I was working for Channel 12 at that time. And I was in the booth, but I didn't get to meet him or anything like that. Mm-hmm. That was one of the advantages of working in news. You often got to meet these people. Mm. In fact, I was working one Rose Parade with a Bell and Howell camera on this hand. I was working with Fox Movie Tone News. And Harry Truman was the parade grand marshal. And he was in the back seat of an open car, a warm day, no rain, and I thought, golly, I've never shaken hands with the President of the United States. Why don't I just go over there and ask him if I can shake hands with him? So with my camera in one hand, and I went over and, Mr. President, I've never shaken hands with the President of the United States. Could I shake your hand? Why, of course you can. So that's the most impressive person that I probably met. I would love to have interviewed him, but I didn't get a chance to. I just took his picture.
How did you see the community change with once television got more popular?
Did the community change?
Yeah. Did you notice any changes in society, the way people dressed or acted, or when television became more popular in homes?
Not that I noticed.
No. Okay.
No. The immediacy of reporting in radio and television is one of the biggest contributions to the electronic age. I mean, you're in touch with stuff around the world now, and that is a big change. And it's great from the news standpoint.
If you could arrange to have an interview with somebody that you didn't have a chance to, who would you pick?
Well, as I said, Truman, I would love to have been able to interview him. Well, there's some people that are hard to interview. This is my own theory. Classical musicians condescend, stepping on no end of toes now, condescend to us peasants that aren't up on opera and all. And they are difficult to interview. Movie actors, I mean Hollywood types, they have to be ready to top you at any moment. Of course, they're hostile to the press, and movie actors and classical musicians I like to interview the least. As to who interviews the most, well, anybody that'll talk is an interview, and you get to talk to people, you would be amazed what you can learn. In my early days, I was at KIEM, and the JCs had a special exhibit going. They had dairy farmers bring in dairy cows, and then the vacant lots in downtown Eureka and all. And so there was this one guy they sent up for me to interview at KIEM. And I was new at interviewing, and I would only ask him questions that could be answered yes or no, which means some people just get a grunt for an answer. So this dairy kid was there, and I said, well, what kind of a cow you got? And he said, well, we've got Guernseys that we're displaying. And I said, well, we've got Jerseys out at our farm. What's the advantage to Guernseys? He says, well, for one thing, they got bigger tits. I didn't know what to do. I ended the interview right there.
Well, I lost my train of thought. Do you have another question?
What was your favorite? Did you prefer radio or television?
You can relax more with radio. There's so much, you have to be up to date, up to the, I mean, you have to wear special clothes. You have to have everything ready ahead of time. Do you need, I'm rambling on here with all these stories. Can you want a story about that?
Sure.
Well, when I worked at Channel 12 to start with, that was an independent station. We had no network, and we did our own local news. So I think my news went on at 9 or 10, and I was followed by Charlie the Franchise with sports. And I would be editing my film, and I had to get that edited the way I wanted it to match the script I had written to go with it, and then get the film into the film library, and they would see that the film got to the technicians to go on the air to be projected for the news. So I would be working right up to the last minute with everything, and I'd getting my script ready, getting my film ready, and then our program director insisted that we wear powder before we went on the air, and I was always afraid I'd inhale some of the powder and not be able to talk. And I think it was max factor number 13, something like that, a special number. And we would run in and get the powder on. And then just before I was getting ready to go on the air one day, the JCs came in. And they said, Sherm, we were having this contest for a free trip to Hawaii, and we've got the lady that's won it named for you. Could you get it on the air for us? So I said, well, yeah, so I wrote it down on a piece of paper and put it on the bottom of my news. And I went through all this rigmarole that I had to go through, and went in the studio and sat down and I read my news. Well, oh, they brought me 2 props. They said, we got these props, and they had a hairy old coconut there and a flower lei, and they said, you can use these props. Well, okay, so I put the, I didn't know what to do with the props, so I put them on the floor beside my chair and did the news. And I came down to my last page, and here's this Mrs. Harry so-and-so in Salem, Oregon. And I knew, and I looked down and I said, oh man, well, the JCs have had this contest for a free trip to Hawaii, and the winner is Mrs. So-and-so, Salem, Oregon. Then I hadn't used their props yet. And so I reached down and I grabbed the coconut and I set that on the desk. I said, well, I didn't get a trip to Hawaii, but at least I got a free lei out of it. And I put the lei around my neck. And that was the end of the show. They cut away to sports. And I didn't realize there was a possible double entendre there. And my floor man had disappeared. And I looked, and here he was, flat on his back on the floor. It looked like somebody imitating a frying egg, you know. And then I realized I pulled this tremendous double entendre, and there wasn't a thing I could do about it. That was the interview I'll never forget.
Well, I remember my question now, which is, there's been some books written about crime in the city of Portland. I mean, the corruption. And was that still around, or did that pop in the news, or was that kind of watch out what you say about who was running the show?
Well, about that, I don't know. You're 2 parts to your question there. There's always going to be crime. There's going to be shootings. There's going to be greed. I've recently been studying Roman law. I find it very interesting because they were facing the same problems we have 2,000 years or more ago. And it's interesting to see how they met problems and the laws they came up with. And they were very smart people. We don't begin to appreciate how good they are. What steered me on to them was during the war, I went to Pompeii 3 times. Went to Herculaneum once, and I was so impressed with what they had done. They were remarkable people, and this was 2,000 years ago, and we think we're doing so good. I mean, they were way ahead of what we didn't catch up with them until, well, I don't know if I could name a specific date that we managed to equal them, but I was greatly interested in the Romans and their laws.
Mm-hmm. As far as the city government and corruption within it, did that?
Well, I don't know that there's corruption within it. You may. Everybody assumes that, but and there may have been, and I wasn't aware of it. Mm-hmm. But I was very impressed with the people in Portland's government. I got to know, like I've already mentioned, Bill Bowes, who dared me to go down in the sewers and shoot a picture. Commissioner Bean was a civil engineer, and later, after I'd left television and was working for the State Health Division, I would have things I'd handle for PR because I was working for the State Health Division, and we wanted to have a big inoculation of dogs for rabies. And the easiest way to do it is to have it at the fire stations because they're distributed throughout the city. And so I went to Commissioner Bean and said, I got a problem. The fire chief says he doesn't want us to put on our dog inoculation clinics or rabies clinics because it disrupts the fire stations too much. And I said to the chief, I warn you, I'm going over your head if you insist on standing on this. And he said, nope, not going to budge. So I went to Commissioner Bean and explained my situation. And he said, well, I see your situation, sir. And he says, we'll convene in just a minute. And I went down to the commission meeting, and they moved for suspension of the rules, and then wanted a motion, placed a motion that the commission was ordering these clinics to be held, and that was it. So I thought Commissioner Bean, there's a while you can still see it up at the zoo, where the hill is starting to slide down. And I'd run into a well digger that used a wand to locate water. You ever seen that done? Well, it works. I can do it. Not that I was as good as he was, but he knew all about it. He based it on the Bible. He used a certain wood a certain time of year and one thing. And he said, Sherm, see, the problem was this is sliding down because of an unknown source of water up there on the zoo grounds, and they wanted to locate this source. And I said, well, let's find this well digger, find man, and have him go up there and find it for you. And he did. He went up and I met him and his well digger, and the well digger said, I'll dig the well for free. And if I don't find the water, he said, it's free. I'll expect to be paid for it if you find the source of water. So we went up there and found around, and the fellow, he broke off a stick about so long and poked it in the ground. He says, here's your source. Well, I told this story on the air, and the fellow said, oh, that wand story's out. Let me show you how to do it. And he said, I got a better way. I got a way the British located water in North Africa during the war. And he had a beautiful cherry wood box so big like this. It had a huge compass in the top of it. And he twirled that around this way and that way, and then set it down. And he went up there and he said, I'd locate this water for you. So I went up there with him. And he searched all around, and I didn't tell him where the other guy had been. And he says, here. And that was 10 feet from the stick I put in the ground for the other guy. So I went back to Commissioner Bean and says, how about this proposition, the well driller? He'll drill your hole for free. He says, Sherm, I'd be laughed out of town. I'm a civil engineer. And if I were to resort to a guy using bent sticks to locate water, I'd be laughed out of my office. So the city didn't take him up on it. But I thought the world of all those commissioners that I knew. They were wonderful people, and if they were crooks, they weren't being crooked when I was around them.
Great. You have any other questions?
No.
We'd like to thank you very, very much for taking the time to...
Well, you're very patient to listen to all my ramblings. But
No,
Enjoyed it.
yeah, it's very, very fascinating to hear what things were like.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you.